Thank you. I'm going to call this meeting of Assembly Committee on Education into order, February 9th, 2021. So welcome everyone. Committee members, for roll call, please unmute yourself and say here or present. Will the Secretary please call roll?
Assemblywoman Duran.
Thank you. I'm going to call this February 2000.
Assemblyman Flores.
Present.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hansen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner.
Here.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Tolles.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Here.
Chair Bilbray Axelrod.
Here. Thank you. And we do have a quorum. Welcome to everyone here and as well online. If you haven't done so, please mute yourself to make sure you have that muted unless you're speaking, just to keep that background noise down. Additionally, committee members, please keep your camera on for the duration of the meeting so we can ensure that we do have a quorum. The meeting materials are available online through the committee's website through Nellis on the NV Ledge site. And just a reminder to folks watching at home in this virtual world, we do have several screens going on. So if you see that members are looking away or looking down, it's probably because they're looking at the presentation or other things having to do with the committee. So don't take that as a sign of disinterest. So the overview of the meeting, we will have two presentations today. We'll have a presentation on the Nevada System of Higher Education from our new Chancellor, Dr. Melody Rose. And then we'll have a presentation from the Dean of UNLV School of Medicine, Dr. Mark Kahn, on the COVID-19 response and vaccination efforts. At this time, I'd like to open it up for our first public comment. Do we have any public comment in the queue?
Chair, the public comment line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. The second order of business we have is that we have a BDR present introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and do this introduction. We occasionally get bill draft requests that will come to the Education Committee, and we need to move them onto the floor, and I will need a motion for that. I want to let members know. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make a motion.
Oh, not yet, not quite yet.
Okay.
I want to let members know voting to move this to the floor does not mean you are committed to vote yes on the bill. It simply allows this piece of legislation to be introduced and then would come back to the committee for an actual committee hearing. What we have today is BDR 34-529 from the Interim Legislative Committee. And the summary is an act relating to education, revising requirements for teachers who provide instruction at a charter school and providing other matters properly relating thereto. At this time, I take a motion to formally introduce BDR 34-529.
So moved.
I have Assemblywoman Miller, Vice Chair Miller has made the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And I have Assemblywoman Gorlow who made the second. Do I have any discussion on the bill?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the summary of that. Just a clarification for the process, because I know we're doing things differently because of the restrictions due to public safety concerns. But can we just walk through what we typically do when we have these introductions behind the bar on the floor? versus how we're doing it in this virtual environment. I just think that that might help clarify some questions that have arisen.
Okay, I will refer to my legal counsel if you want to discuss that, or Ms. Robusto.
Amanda, do you want to jump in, or would you like me to start with the overview? Not hearing from Amanda. I will go ahead. Christy Robusto, Committee Policy Analyst, for the record. So in general, typically you're going to have your BDR introductions occur on the floor, and that is how it occurs both in the pre-COVID normal legislative session arena, as well as the current session that is being done remotely. Every so often, and what happens with BDRs that come from legislative committees from the interim. So this one is from the Legislative Committee on Education and was proposed and voted on during their work session back in September of 2020. When we get a BDR request from an interim legislative committee, that will come first to the committee that it's associated with. And so what the members are currently voting on is simply to introduce the BDR so that it can then go to the floor. So nobody is voting on whether they would like the measure to pass or not. It's simply a vote to say, we will introduce this piece of legislation so that it can go to the floor to then be able to come back to have a committee hearing. Does that help clarify at all?
Thank you. That clarifies part of the process of this bill from the interim committee. I know I was on that interim committee, and we voted on the recommendations, but haven't seen the language. And if I recall correctly, for the last two sessions, typically when we have an behind the bar meeting, we pass out hard copies so that the members are able to actually see it and just briefly walk through not just the summary, but actually see the language. And then at that time, we as a committee vote to accept that this is a committee bill that we will be hearing. And I believe the purpose of that is so that, since it is a committee bill, the committee members have a chance to actually see the language to say, yes, indeed, we agree that this is a committee bill. We're not agreeing that we're passing it or that we're, voting on the merit of the bill, but we agree that it reflects the committee's work on the interim for that process. And since we haven't actually seen the physical bill, I just wonder if we could have that opportunity before taking this vote.
Apologies, couldn't find my unmute button. Christy Robusto, Committee Policy for Analyst for the record. I am going to have to double check on some of our processes and procedures for you, Assemblywoman Tolles, and I will allow our legal counsel to also jump in to clarify anything as well.
And I just, for the record, serving, this is my third term in the Assembly. I don't recall seeing, but I'm going to, let's take a 1-minute recess.
Yes, we're back, Chair.
We are back? Okay,
Don't
thank
think
you.
we ever left.
Okay, so any other discussion on the bill? And it was confirmed that the BDR language is not public until it has been introduced on the floor. So after we refer it from committee, it will be introduced onto the floor and then it will be made public. So is there any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll complete a roll call vote. When the
Madam
committee,
Chair, I think that Assemblywoman Hansen has.
Oh,
her hand
okay,
raised.
I did not see her. Assemblywoman Hansen, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sorry, I know there's a lot going on, so you didn't see me. It's not a problem. I actually just put my question in the chat. And maybe I should clarify. I don't know if you want the questions in the regular chat. It's only my second session, and maybe my memory's not serving me well. I don't recall this process, though. Is this how we've done it before? And I just don't remember that we.
Yes, this is how the committee, any committee bills that come are at the chair of the committee brings it forward. We vote it out of committee onto the floor, then it refers back. So, Christine,
I'm sorry, just to clarify, I guess because I'm not seeing it, that's the part I mean. I've not did a vote on something I've not seen. So, I know it's not supposed to be public, but we had a bill like this in natural resources yesterday, but we had a copy of it. I missed it. Did it come in a?
So these were the recommendations that came out of the interim committee. So if you watch the committee, interim committee, you understand what was discussed and what is in this bill.
Okay. So no actual hard copy. We don't get a hard.
Until after it's introduced onto the floor.
Okay.
Okay, Assemblywoman Torres.
Yeah, and Chair, I think too, maybe it would be helpful for our colleagues. We can just send out the link later that has all the information so you can view the working document from the interim committee. It's about like 90 pages long, maybe even longer. But there's a lot of details too about what's going into the BDR that I thought was really helpful.
Yeah, and that link is available, but we will make sure that Ms. Robusto, if you would get that out to the committee members. Okay, all right. So we've had a motion, we've had a second, we've discussed, and we are going to go ahead and have the committee secretary call your name and say yes or no when we do the roll call vote. Madam Secretary, go ahead.
Assemblywoman Duran,
Yes.
Assemblyman Flores,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hansen,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hardy,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Krasner,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Marzola,
Yes.
Assemblyman MacArthur,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Nguyen,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Tolles,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Torres,
Yes.
Chair Bilbray Axelrod.
Yes, and the motion passes. Thank you very much. Next, we will move on to our first presentation. I'd like to invite Dr. Rose, our new chancellor for our NSHE, to begin her presentation when she is ready. We're delighted to have you here, and we look forward to not only your presentations, but questions afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Melody Rose, for the record, Chancellor of the Nevada System of Higher Education. I have my colleague, Andrew Klinger, CFO of NSHE, with me today, and he's going to be my wingman and help me progress the slides. So I think he needs to share them and share his screen, and then we will get going from there. And because, of course, the committee has received the slides, I'm going to zip through them with your permission, Chairwoman Bilberry Axelrod, because I would really enjoy having the conversation and hearing from the committee. So I will clip through the slides. I should also point out to you that hopefully you have received in your offices today a packet from INSHE that includes an accounting of all of the students that live in your district, as well as our accountability report and our citizens guide to the INSHE budget. And both of those are additional sources of information for you as you move through this session. So again, today I'm just delighted to be with you and to provide you with an overview of the Nevada system of higher education. I know some of you know us very well, and this is an opportunity really for me to introduce myself and what we are working on since my arrival. Next slide, Andrew. And again, just quickly, I'm going to share with you the 5 strategic goals that were adopted by the board in 2018 and where our progress is on those 5 strategic goals. I thought it would also be nice to spend a few moments sharing with you how we have been handling COVID-19 in our communities. And then we will move to a conversation about our community colleges. And I'll round it out with some thoughts to share with you about the initiatives that I have kicked off since my arrival in August. Next slide, please. So again, the 5 strategic goals, these should be familiar to those of you who have been paying attention to higher education for the last few years. The board adopted these with the assistance of my predecessor, and they are really focused on how to move higher education forward for all Nevadans. And as you all know, I'm a first-generation college student, so access, success, and closing the achievement gap are all very, very near and dear to my heart. We're also very committed to both workforce and advancing research and bringing it home to Nevada so that we can create a more diversified economy. And so those remain our 5 strategic goals. And in the next slide, I will be sharing with you some high-level data about how we're delivering on these goals. And as I say, there is more data in the accountability report, which you should have in your offices. And if you really want to dig in, go to our website and you can see all the data cross-tabulated by demographics if you want to do a deep dive. What you can see here in the access strategic goal is a bit of a bubble in enrollment following the Great Recession. Oftentimes, higher education is counter-cyclical to the economy, and we definitely experienced that just after the 2008 recession. Things then are fairly stable to slightly growing into this most recent recession. 2018, of course, is the last year for which we have official data in from the Department of Education validated there. So that's why the slide ends with 2018. We'll be talking a little bit later about enrollment patterns and how COVID has affected them. Next slide. One of the things that I've shared with several of you when we've met one-on-one is my passion for the diversity of this state. I was born in LA, and I'm really excited to be back in a very culturally rich environment. And that is very much demonstrated on this slide. So you can see that as a whole, NSHE became a majority minority system in 2015. And we are now conferring more degrees to students of color than to white students, which of course maps on to the demographics of our state and ultimately will map on to the demographics of our nation. So in many ways, Nevada is leading on the leading edge of demographic shifts, and we should, as a result, be on the leading edge of policy to support these students. Next slide, please. Student success is really about outcomes, and one of the key ways, as you all know, of how higher education measures outcomes is how many students do we matriculate, retain, and complete. And this graph shows you where we have been in 2014 and where we were most recently with graduation rates in 2019. And this slide goes over the 3-4-year institutions, and you can see a steady progression of improvement with graduation rates in the aggregate. which I think is a very important directional change. I would say too, these are largely on par with national median performance indicators for like institutions. That doesn't mean we're going to rest where we are. We have a ways to go, and happy to chat with you about what the levers are that we need to pull in order to bump these graduation rates up. Next slide. For the community colleges, you can see here there is some significant variance across our community colleges. And again, this is graduation rates for the associate's degree at the 4 community colleges. I know it is probably a point of interest that CSN is sitting at 12%, while GBC is at 42%. So there's a great deal of variance. I would say Truckee Meadows and WNC are more around the national median. And so we have some work to do. I know Dr. Zaragoza is working very, very hard on this. And I have to say, although it might not feel like it, a 3% improvement in 5 years' time is actually somewhat aggressive. And I know that won't feel satisfying, but in terms of how we move the needle and how quickly we can move the needle, that's not a bad rate of change. So we, again, can talk about how to accelerate that change in the Q&A. Next slide. Here we're paying close attention again. Our third strategic goal is to close the achievement gap. So we should not be seeing differences in retention and completion rates based on race or ethnicity. And it is a fact that this is a challenge nationwide. You can see here, again, across a 4-year spread, where we've been with students of color and white students at 2- and 4-year institutions. And this is a point of real interest to me, because I believe very strongly that if we lean in and we direct resources strategically, we can close these gaps and be a model for the nation. And many of you have heard that that's one of my aspirations. I think we can learn here, implement the right strategic initiatives, and then assist the rest of the nation with this very same objective. Next slide. Again, here too is just another way of showing you how many more students of color are coming into NSHE institutions. And this is a huge shift in our demographics and a very important one for us to be paying attention to. As we move forward, you can see white students basically flat over this time period and a major acceleration of attendance among our families of color. So that's really, really critical. And what we need to do then is to focus on the retention efforts and the completion efforts to get them over the finish line. Next slide. Just a word here on workforce. Of course, every time there is an economic downturn, there's a microscope on community colleges. They are first responders in terms of economic downturns. And I think of them as being our workhorses of workforce. And you can see here some of the skills certificates that had been prevalent in our community colleges before the recession. Not a whole lot of change in terms of areas of focus, but we have all of 4 of our community colleges doing some very creative things right now. CSN, for example, is about to launch some weekend certificates for those displaced workers who maybe can't focus on retraining during the week because they're taking care of children or watching over elders. So very important that we are agile and we are shifting the way that we are reaching displaced workers to support them during this economic calamity. Next slide. Of course, we have 3 research institutions, 2 being R1 designated universities, and then of course our internationally recognized DRI. And this is a very important number for you all to see that grants and contracts were basically flat from about 2012 to 2015, and you've seen an uptick. And I know from speaking with the presidents since that time that these numbers continue to grow. And one of the things that you're going to hear me talking a lot about is how to find grant opportunities where our 3 research institutions can be co-PIs and apply jointly. I've seen this happen in other states. In small states with small infrastructures like ours, we really can be more competitive for those big grants federally when we have multiple institutions applying jointly. So those 3 presidents are working on that objective, and we're going to be setting some KPIs for them to make sure that we're accountable to those goals. Next, please. So obviously can't come and chat with you about higher education at this moment without sharing some of what we've been doing since the onset of the crisis. And as many of you know, we went almost fully online about a year ago. And I always want to give a shout out to our faculty who, at the drop of a hat, had to move their courses online in an emergency setting. And they really deserve our thanks and support, because that is not an easy thing to do. And our students hung with us. I know that some of you are really keen to talk about how COVID has been affecting students. I'll just say a couple things here, and maybe we can come back to it during Q&A. Our students are continuing their studies, some of them under really trying conditions. And, you know, all of the disparities that existed for our students around socioeconomic indicators are exacerbated by this crisis. And so differences in access to high-speed internet, differences in access to high-end technology, having a quiet space at home where you can focus and study without interruption from siblings or others. All of these are disparities that have come on under greater scrutiny, and well so, I think it has really highlighted many of the strains that were pre-existing. What I can say about these students is that they are hanging in. And you may have read nationally that there are some systems across the country that have been slammed by enrollment declines in double digits. And we have been very, very fortunate, and we should be proud of our institutions because they have continued to serve our students so well that we haven't seen that slide. Nationally, community colleges are upwards of 15 to 30% losses in enrollment. I can tell you that ours this past fall were about 8% down compared to the prior fall. So yes, we've seen some erosion at the community college level. We very much expect those folks to be back. Some of them simply made the decision that learning online was not great for them, and they wanted to sit it out and come back when things return to normal. So we're sitting in a pretty good spot. In terms of student grades and completion and so forth, we're not seeing dropout rates change much on account of COVID. We're not seeing even grades change much on account of COVID. We have seen, one of the Assemblywomen asked me to talk about whether we're seeing more Fs, more unsatisfactories. And there's a slight uptick of unsatisfactories, but there's a bigger uptick in the letter A that has been assigned to students. And it's interesting, I think faculty are being very understanding of the conditions that our students are living through. Last thing I'll say about this, and we can come back to it if you'd like to, is that we just launched at NSHE a mental health task force last Friday. And it is an internal working group with experts from all of our campus that I have asked to come together to study the mental health impacts to our students, staff, and faculty, and really try to identify some solutions and supports that we can surface and scale. Because of course the impacts of COVID are not going to go away anytime soon. And some of the mental health challenges, of course, are layered onto pre-existing challenges. And we need to be attentive to these. So I'll move to next slide. I just thought it was important for us. There's so much conversation right now around our community colleges, and I wanted just to kind of level set with the committee some of the things that are important to know. Our community colleges are what are referred to as comprehensive community colleges, meaning that they do certificate programs. That's the retraining, upskilling for displaced workers that usually comes in short terms, like small bite certificate programs. Very important aspect of what we do around workforce. For the most part, however, these community colleges are offering associate's degrees. And as you see from the slide here, 92% of the students who showed up on our community colleges doorsteps this fall declared that they intended to get an associate's degree. And so that, may be related to nursing, it may be related to HVAC. Most of those associate's degrees, of course, are workforce related. But we don't just train at community colleges, we also transfer. And so it's important for all of you to know that, like the majority of states in the United States and almost all of the Western states, we also offer on our community college campuses select bachelor's degrees, technically called Bachelors of Applied Sciences. We worked very hard to make sure there's no duplication with the four-year institutions. And this allows, for the most part, underrepresented first-generation college students to take a bite at that four-year degree in a way that is more accessible, lower price point, and I think is a very important component of what we do. Next slide. Just a few stats for you. Just about 51,000 of our students are at our 4 community colleges. Almost all of them are enrolled part-time. They are juggling work. They are juggling families. These are students that have a lot going on and they really need our supports. About 57% are female, which is approximately the national average, and 58% are students of color. Next slide. Again, the community colleges are very oftentimes a pathway to a bachelor's degree. And we've got a few statistics for you here. One of the things that NSHE has really focused on, and I can't take any credit for this, it all happened before my arrival, but one of the things they have focused very keenly on is seamless transfer between 2- and 4-year institutions, which is one of the things that you can do when you're all in one system. And you can see that just last year, before I arrived, there was an audit conducted to review how well our transfer pathways were working. And I was so pleased when I arrived to learn that the audit produced a result of 95%. What that means is that our students aren't losing credits and time and money when they're transferring from 2- to 4-year institutions. And you know how important that is to make sure our students are moving along so they can get out into the workforce, take care of their families and their communities. Next slide. You've probably all seen this news, but I'm putting it in every slide deck I'm doing right now. We're really, really proud of CSN pulling down a nearly $7 million Department of Commerce grant to work with the city of Las Vegas to erect a workforce training facility. So right on schedule, really excited about that. And when you see folks from CSN, please give them a big shout out. Next slide. So what's next for NSHE? One of the things that I wanted to share with you is that while we began this slide deck with those 5 strategic goals, and NSHE is very focused on them, I drew the presidents together for an all-day retreat in the fall and asked about how we can accelerate our delivery of those promises. And what you'll see what you'll see in a moment is that we have focused on establishing metrics and targets for each of those 5 strategic goals. So the presidents are now working collaboratively with me to assign themselves targets for achieving those 5 strategic goals, because if you can't measure it, you're never going to achieve it. And that will also allow us to be clear about when things are working, clear about when we need to pivot, and to be accountable to all of you in presenting that data going forward. So I'm really proud of that effort that's underway. And then if we go to the next slide, what you will see is that we've got those strategic goals. And what you can see here, I'm sorry it's a bit messy, it's a work in progress, is that I am working with the presidents to assign the strategic initiatives and the strategic partnerships, again, that will accelerate our work. And so I just want to pull out one example for you. I am passionate about dual credit. I supported it and was part of the development of dual credit in Oregon. And as you know, we've been offering dual credit to some of our high school students, but it is not working seamlessly and it is not working in an equitable fashion. In my view, you should not have your dual credit offerings or price point have any relationship to your zip code. And so working with Superintendent Ebert, she and I have put together a task force to identify the barriers to equitable dual credit access. And then we will be working with our boards to move forward in terms of any policy changes that might be needed to get truly accessible participation in dual credit for all Nevadan high schools. So next slide. Just this is, again, I'm not going to go into detail on all of these. You have these materials, but the next few slides show you some of the strategic initiatives that we're working on. I already mentioned the mental health task force. This fall, all first-year students across NSHE will be enrolled in college-level math and English, and with or without correct support. So we are moving away from that antiquated remedial model that was really challenging for students and had carried some stigma with it, and really moving all of our students forward and giving them whatever level of support they need in order to succeed. The advising initiative, also something that was initiated before my arrival, is trying to get our student to advisor ratios to the best national practices, which is a ratio of 350 to 1. And all of our institutions are moving very, very carefully in that direction. Next slide. A couple of other things. I've already mentioned dual credit. We will also be working to advance online instruction. As you might imagine, having gone online abruptly a year ago has revealed some strengths, and it has also revealed some places where we need to do some additional work. And so you'll be hearing some more from us there. Next slide. This is the last slide of its kind. I am working very carefully with all of the campus chief diversity officers. I am a big believer that if you can see it, you can be it. And one of the best ways to move the needle on student achievement and closing the achievement gap is to have professors, advisors, other support people on campus who look like our students. And so in the coming weeks, you're going to be hearing more from my office about moving forward an equity initiative around hiring and retaining representative faculty and staff. Of course, we're going to keeping on with our workforce development efforts and building the support for our 2 R1 institutions and bringing knowledge to the state of Nevada and beyond. Next slide. And that is it for me. I'll take a breather, Madam Chair, and see what kind of questions your committee might have for me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rose. Before you take that breather, sorry, could you give the committee a little background? I'm very impressed with your background and the diversity that you bring. You kind of mentioned it really quickly, but if you would just give a 30-second, 60-second background on yourself, I'd appreciate that.
That's very kind, Chair. And yes, for the record, Chancellor Rose. So you all know that I've spent 25 years in higher education in Oregon. I ran the Oregon University system there and was a campus president. But I always like to say that the most important things about me are really not on my resume, although this group might be interested to know that my PhD is in American government and my expertise is women in politics. So nice to be speaking to a majority female legislature. My personal background, though, I think does equip me for this job in an important way. So I was born in LA to a very young mom and a family filled with generations of addiction challenges. And as a result, my little brother and I got kind of dragged all around the state of California. You may name a city in California and I've probably lived there. The important thing is that at my third high school, a guidance counselor pulled me aside in the hall and stuck a college application in my hand and said, I think you're a smart kid and I think you can break these cycles of poverty and these cycles of addiction if you go to college. And I guess the rest is history because I've never left. And, you know, my North Star is making sure that policymakers like you understand the transformational power that higher education has. I know it because I lived it. And in this job, I'm trying to advance it to the state of Nevada. So thank you for asking me.
Thank you. And I did want my committee and the public to know your background because I do think it's unique and I think it's going to really bring something to NSHE, and I look forward to working with you in the future. I have a number of questions, but I know my committee members do as well. I have starting with Assemblywoman Gorlow, and then I will move to Assemblywoman Torres. And then if anybody else has a question, if you want to raise your hand, I can write you down right now. Assemblywoman Tolles. Am I missing anyone else? Okay, and if it comes up, I can add you to the queue. Okay, so we will start with Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going back to slide 6 that talks about the graduation rates for the four-year institutions. I was wondering how those rates compared nationally and also what barriers you see preventing higher rates, specifically with the Nevada State College.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you, Chair Bilbray Axelrod, to you and through you, for the record, Chancellor Rose. You know, graduation rates aren't where any of us want them to be, right? We want them to be at 100%. And I can tell you that for the R1 institutions, UNR is right around the national average, and UNLV is slightly below the national median of graduation rates for 4 years. And I think with our new president, Dr. Whitfield, you're going to see a laser-like focus on that, moving that needle. And you know, one of the things that I think helps with our completion rate, so I'll start with the positive. One of the things that helps in Nevada with our completion rate is actually our low price point. So in my budget presentation a few weeks back, I thanked the money committees for being generous and investing in our higher education systems. That allows us not to pass too much of the price along to students. So that is contributing to our success. The kinds of things that get challenging and show up in graduation rates for all institutions is, you know, it's a whole mix of variables. What kind of preparation is the student bringing with them? What kind of competing demands on their time is a student bringing with them? How much have we invested in advising? How much have we invested in culturally specific services? And I think with Dr. Whitfield's arrival, if you saw his State of the State State of the University speech just last week, you would have heard him talk about this focus around culturally specific, equitable services for our students, because that becomes very, very important when you're talking about first generation students. And I'll tell you a really quick example from my own experience. Obviously, I'm a white woman, but as a first generation college student, I got to campus. My dad dropped me off on the corner. He didn't even know he was supposed to, you know, take me up to my dorm room and help me unpack. He literally dropped me off on the corner. I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know what the protocols were. I was lost. And so if you think about those challenges, often with first gen students, we think about the challenges as being financial, but they're also about not having the social capital or the social know-how to navigate a system that your parents didn't go through. And I believe very firmly that Dr. Whitfield will move that needle on changing the outcomes. In terms of NSC, which you asked about specifically, I'm pleased to see that those numbers are going up, and they're going up pretty quickly in terms of completion. Part of what you're seeing there, of course, is that you've got a very young institution, and a very young institution that's growing in double digits every year will very frequently have the trouble of like, just you're on a hamster wheel of trying to keep up with the student population. And I think that's one of the things that's contributing to NSC's graduation rate. But again, the margin of increase year over year is what we want to see. So I have faith that these are moving all in the right direction. I mean, I've seen places around the country that are moving backwards in completion. So Nevada should be proud.
Thank you. If I could have a quick follow-up, Chair.
Sure.
Also,
So, you know, you can go directly to our members.
Thank you.
Real quick, with these rates, those are students that have completed in 4 years. Do we have any data that might show a student that might have taken an extra year, especially since you mentioned the time constraints that a student might have? So do we have any of that information? Who might finish 1 or 2 years afterwards?
We absolutely do. I can't pull it out off the top of my head, but as you know, actually, traditionally, we do measure in 6-year increments for that very reason. And at an institution like UNLV, even a 4-year institution, you're going to see a fair number of part-time students, and they take longer to finish. And so that's another variable kind of pulling on the completion rate, is that you've got students who are juggling an awful lot. So if you'd like, Assemblywoman, we can certainly supply you the 6-year graduation rates for all of our degree granting institutions.
Thank you very much. I would enjoy that. Thank you.
Sure.
And if you could have that sent over to the committee, and we'll make sure that we get it out to our committee members. I think we'd all be interested in that. So thank you. I will next go to Assemblywoman Tolles.
Thank you so much, Chair.
I apologize. I missed Assemblywoman Torres, but I'll get you next. I apologize.
Please.
Okay, am I supposed to go, or is Assemblywoman Tolles supposed to go? Either way.
Please, after you, Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Assemblywoman Tolles. So my question is just if you could talk, and I know we've met extensively both during the interim and recently a session has started, if you could talk a little bit about the work that the different institutions have done to help with our teacher pipeline, because I think this is really critical when we're talking about how we ensure that we have enough teachers in the classroom, that we're also considering what we're doing to grow our own here. So if you could talk a little bit about the work that the various institutions at NTR were doing.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Tolles. Again, for the record, Chancellor Rose, I'm really glad you asked me that question. So you know, because I've shared with you in the past that I have a partnership emerging with Superintendent Ebert. We're already delivering on the dual credit task force, but she and I actually convened a meeting about 2 weeks ago with our deans of education and some of her policy experts to, 1, analyze the gap, 2, begin the conversation, not just about the gap, right? We're producing about 800 students, teachers a year. The state needs, I think, 2,400 a year. So there's a significant gap. And even though NSC's teacher prep program is growing, and it's growing quickly, it's not growing fast enough to collapse that gap. So we've had 1 meeting with that team. She and I then followed up and agreed that we need here too a joint task force that will be charged by she and I to identify the challenges, identify the barriers, and come back to her and to me with recommendations for change. This one likely won't surprise you. Will eventually need an investment. Obviously, to get from 800 to 2,400 is a pretty big delta. And as you also know, the problem isn't just having enough teachers, it's which teachers. And as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, it's so important that instructors look like the kids in their classrooms. And in order to get that right, we have to be super intentional about growing our own teacher corps. And so I'm really grateful to Superintendent Ebert for working together with me. I come from a state, she's also spent time in a state that really views education as cradle to career. And so every time we can kind of bring our forces together, I think we'll surface the right solutions, and then with our board's approval, be able to bring them to you. And so that's my hope.
Thank you very much. And now we will go on to Assemblywoman Tolles.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And that last little conversation was so valuable. It got me thinking just about the same way that in your story, Chancellor, it was teachers who reached out to you that changed the course of your future. In that same way, how teachers could reach out to students who could be potentially part of that teacher pipeline, recognizing that talent and mentoring up into those roles. I think that's a beautiful vision. And if I may, just with a little indulgence, stop for a minute just to reflect on, as I look at this PowerPoint, I like PowerPoints, but I got particularly excited about this one because having taught in the system of higher education for 16 years, these are more than just slides. I've seen the transition of our student population to see more first generation, more diversity, to see those increased graduation rates is, if I just may reflect on that, those successes are seen and realized, and we still have much further to go, but I think it's really good to acknowledge that success because that came from setting those goals. I remember when we first had those conversations 10 years ago about the need for more diversity and inclusion, and then to see the results of that. I just think it's, and credit transfers. Thank God for better credit transfers. So, but thank you for that indulgence, Madam Chair. To move on to a quick question. On page 11, you talked about research and you talked about the investment of dollars. And I personally would like to learn more about this, and I think it would benefit our committee to understand what that impact is on our state, just how significant that is to have, research expanded and recognized at our universities. And so what is that economic impact to our state? How does that translate to jobs? How does that translate to overall goals of economic diversification? If you could just spend maybe just a minute or two helping us to understand the significance of that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Tolles. I'm happy to, and of course, if the chairwoman would like at another time, we can dive more deeply into this, because I think research very oftentimes is the aspect of our mission that perhaps is least understood, and it feels a little bit amorphous. So very frequently, and it is the case certainly at DRI, for example, that there is a huge multiplier effect to the economics of research. So let's just talk about the money part first, and then we'll talk about the lives involved in this. And I'm very much aware that, of course, we have my colleague Dean Kahn is going to be speaking to you here shortly and can elaborate. Very frequently, the multiplier, and at DRI, the multiplier effect of the state's investment is about a 1 to 3. So you invest $1, DRI turns that into 3. And the way that research multiplies like that, of course, is several-fold. One is that, sometimes the basic research that's going on at our research institutions will translate into tech transfer. So it spins out into a new corporation that pays taxes, that hires Nevadans, that moves our economy forward. So there's a very clear economic impact to research investment. But I would also say that there's a very clear impact of research investments on quality of life. So I think about some of the research that's going on in our medical schools. I think about the research going on, in your basic chem lab. I think about what DRI does around water research, other natural resources research that will improve lives of Nevadans. So much of this research is directly contributing to enhancement of our communities and our quality of life. And I think the easiest one to understand, obviously, is medical breakthroughs. If we haven't personally benefited from a medical breakthrough, somebody in our family has. And the other one that's easiest, I think, is anything related to the environment. We've heard from President Biden very recently that he's going to try and move our economy from a coal-based to a solar-based energy development system. We're sitting in a really great place for that opportunity. And we have scholars on these 3 campuses who are experts in that field. And it will be very impactful to the quality of our lives moving forward. So there is an economic outcome. It's positive. There is also a quality of life outcome. And thirdly, I think we would be remiss if we didn't link research to instruction. So sometimes we think about these as being isolated activities. And I can tell you again, just as a scholar myself, I'm a political scientist, did a lot of research, written multiple books. I always had students on my research teams. And participating in a research activity as an undergraduate is considered a high impact practice. When you get a student involved on a research team, they are much more likely to complete their degree and move out into the workforce. So there is a very important nexus between the student success initiatives and a research investment. And too oftentimes, I think we overlook that component.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. And I know we do have another presentation, but I do have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. I too am very excited about the opportunities that the 3 UNR, UNLV, and DRI will be working together for those research dollars. I know I was excited when I saw that UNLV had the first room temperature superconductor. So that was very exciting, and we're just amazing stuff. I have 2 questions. One is, you mentioned the audit, that an audit was done, I think right before you came, that you looked at the transfers, and we were able to see that people weren't losing credit. I have 2 questions. Was that internal or external, and did they look at anything else?
That was an internal audit that we conducted for ourselves. Of course, we have traditional audits going on all the time, auditing all kinds of functions on all of our campuses, and external audits, of course. So that was a separate activity, really to demonstrate to ourselves if our policies of linking 2- and 4-year institutions were working.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for that clarification. My other question was, if you could just quickly list, if you can, you mentioned that CSN has the weekend certificates. What other public-private partnerships are going on within NSHE? Because I do believe that this is really the key to our workforce diversification, is to get, the great jobs of the future right to people right where they need them.
Well, I see Dr. Khan on the screen here, and so I would be remiss if I didn't point out what's going on at UNLV. So this morning I shared at LBGEA, for example, the Harry Reid Research Park is a great example. You've got that filled with some of the top industries, and they are there working alongside our researchers for advancement and expansion of our economic diversity. So that's an example. And she took the lead on creating a partnership specifically with MGM to be able to offer them just-in-time degrees so that their employees could advance through the corporation more quickly. As you can imagine, given what the last year has looked like for them, we haven't had as many of their employees move through as we hoped in our first year, but I know that that number is going to climb. So the list is actually quite long of what we call P3s, public-private partnerships. And again, we'd be pleased to provide you with a memo or come back and give a presentation on that specifically.
Let's start with that memo. I think all of our members would be interested to see that, and we'll go from there.
Sounds
We have
good.
113 days left. Is that right? So, okay. Well, if we don't have any other pressing, dying questions, we will move on to our next presentation, which I'm very excited about. And thank you so much, Dr. Rose, for coming. And we expect great things from you. And I think you are up to the challenge.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate seeing all of you. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Okay, so next we will go to the UNLV response to COVID-19 presentation. We have Dr. Mark Kahn, Dean of UNLV's School of Medicine, on their COVID-19 response and vaccination efforts. Dr. Kahn, you are ready to begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, committee, and guests. What I think I'd like to do is I will talk about our COVID response, but I want to give just a brief background on the School of Medicine itself. So we, as you know, began planning for School of Medicine at UNLV in 2014. Our founding dean was hired a year after. We recruited our first class in 2017, and this year we will have our first match, where our medical students learn where they're going to be doing their residencies and our first graduation. Next slide, please. So our mission is simple. We care for the community. We do that through education, patient care, research, and importantly, community engagement. And running through this are two themes. One is people, planning and process, and the other is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reason I include this slide is just to show you really what we're about at the School of Medicine. We want to care for our community. And COVID really provides a nice example on how a School of Medicine and an academic health center can do just that. Next slide, please. We've treated more than 52,000 patients. This is not with COVID, but in general, since we've been a School of Medicine, performed over 50,000 surgeries and delivered over 5,000 babies. I'm going to talk about COVID in the next couple slides. We've done research on stem cells to repair damaged hearts. We've done research on motor vehicle accidents. All of our students are involved in the community, and in COVID, they've been answering phones, and our more senior students are on the front line taking care of patients. We're about to start a free clinic in Nevada for our most vulnerable populations, and we're doing that with the other health science schools, including dental medicine, nursing, and integrative health. And we're working with the schools to not only provide after-school education, but also after-school health care, again, to needy populations. Importantly, construction's well underway for our new 130,000 square foot medical education building that is a P3 with a private development corporation who have been very generous in their donation to the university and NSHE. If I could have the next slide. Here's an artist rendering of what our new building will look like. This is in the Las Vegas Medical District. So not only will this be the front place for our School of Medicine, but this will also be an impetus for economic development in the medical district itself. We anticipate housing, we anticipate restaurants, gyms, et cetera, to come in the area, really because of the medical education building and the medical school itself. Next slide. We have some new initiatives. I'm an MD MBA. We're going to start our MD MBA program. We're going to have a combined MD MPH, or a degree in public health, and a PhD. We're working on, I had a meeting today, an early accept program with our honors college, so we can take the best and the brightest students in and around Las Vegas and convince them to stay here at UNLV and eventually practice medicine in the state of Nevada. I've talked about our community-based clinics, and we've talked about economic diversification. At my previous job, I developed a tech commercialization program, and we're working with Blackfire and the Harry Reid Center and the other schools and units in the university to bring that sort of program here as well with the medical school. Next slide. So we have some things in the works. We're awaiting notification on our final accreditation. We do provide a lot of uncompensated care, and even though we've done a lot of things in 3.5 years, we're still very much a startup. Next slide. This is my leadership team. I'm not going to go through that in any great detail, but I include that just to bring up the point that, you know, we're a team. We're a team at the School of Medicine. We're a team with our community partners. We're a team with the other schools in the university. We're a team with NSHE, and we're a team with our community. So next slide. So now let me talk about, next slide. Okay, now let me talk a little bit about COVID. So as Chancellor Rose showed in an early slide, in the very beginning of the pandemic, we were out in front offering curbside testing, and we were one of the first people to actually do testing for COVID. We did it irrespective of a patient's ability to pay, and we performed testing during the week. We performed, I think, somewhere near 30,000 plus tests during the early time period of COVID. I'm a hematologist by background, so I have expertise in blood diseases. And when I started April 1st, one of the things I wanted to bring to our community was a process for convalescent plasma. Now, what convalescent plasma is once a patient is sick with COVID and recovers, their plasma, the liquid part of their blood, contains antibodies that can be useful for very sick patients who are suffering with COVID. So that required a partnership with UMC, our partner hospital, with Vitalent Blood Services, with the ICU, et cetera. But we were the first in the state to offer convalescent plasma as a treatment for patients suffering with the COVID virus. Again, our medical students contacted patients to see if they would be willing to donate plasma. We also had cooperation with the nursing school and schools of public health. Finally, once the first vaccines became available from Pfizer, we've been on the front line vaccinating frontline workers, including healthcare providers, police, fire, and we're now actively involved in getting the NSHE community vaccinated and Clark County School District. We intend, we've already vaccinated somewhere around 24,000 people. We expect that to continue well into the summer. And our goal is to be involved in vaccination until each and every eligible person in Southern Nevada is vaccinated for this potentially fatal disease. Let me talk a little bit now about the virus itself. Let me talk about some things that are up and coming in the virus, and then I'll be available for questions. So right now we have two vaccines that are approved under emergency use. One is the Pfizer vaccine. That's a 2-dose vaccine given 3 weeks apart. And that's the vaccine that requires really cold temperatures. It requires minus 80-degree storage. At UNLV, we have 2 freezers that can accommodate such cold storage. And we're a storage site really for the Southern Nevada Health District for administration and deployment of Pfizer vaccine. In the United States and in Nevada, we also have the second Moderna vaccine. That's also given in 2 doses 4 weeks apart, and that doesn't require temperatures quite as cold. Within the next week to 10 days, it's expected that the FDA will grant emergency use authorization to a vaccine developed by Johnson & Johnson. That is a different type of vaccine. It's not an mRNA vaccine, and therefore doesn't require the super cold temperatures. The other advantage of the J&J vaccine is it only requires one dose. So we're, as soon as those vaccines are available, we plan to be administering that vaccine as well. Again, it's a bit more efficient, and the J&J vaccine is going to be easier to get into the community because A, it only requires one dose, so you don't have to track people and make sure they come in for their second dose, and B, it doesn't require the ultra cold storage that requires special freezers in order to administer the vaccine. The FDA has also approved under emergency use monoclonal antibodies. Those are really antibodies that are made in the lab that are targeted to the coronavirus. Our partner hospital at UMC and our intensive care unit doctors are giving these monoclonal antibodies to patients who qualify. And in the patient populations that are eligible to receive these antibodies, the outcomes are the national outcomes are rather surprisingly positive. I just met with the CEO at UMC. We meet regularly, and I'm happy to report that the outcomes of our patients with COVID are better than the national average, and that's really a tribute to the nurses, the respiratory techs, the pharmacists, and the doctors, all of whom are taking care of this very unique and sick population. The rates in Nevada as a state and in Southern Nevada have begun to decline, which is very good news. As of today, our primary teaching hospital has 30 COVID patients. Although that seems like a lot, that's almost half the max that we have seen during the pandemic. Moving forward, we intend, again, to continue to be one of the primary sources for vaccination for the virus. We, as an academic health center, intend to be on the front lines with the most modern treatments, including newer drugs, including monoclonal antibodies, et cetera, to treat patients suffering with the disease. And in conclusion, we want to be really a major part in helping Southern Nevada get through this dire pandemic. So with that, Madam Chair, I thank you for your time and attention, and I am open to questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan. I know we have a question from Assemblyman Flores. If you would like to, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, I just wanted to say thank you. And I don't really have a question. It's more of a comment. I know the UNLV School of Medicine has stepped up in so many different ways. I think you were being humble and maybe not necessarily highlighting just how much amazing work you've done. Particularly, we worked closely with Dr. Cooley, and I just wanted to highlight Dr. Cooley because I know the Nevada Hispanic Legislative Caucus, the Black Legislative Caucus, the nonprofits, Familia Vota en Puentes. I know you were instrumental in running that patient support program, still are involved in all that. So for those of you who don't know, it's just UNLV stepped up in such an amazing way. I just want to say kudos to you. I don't know that I had an opportunity to necessarily say it with the pandemic happening and everybody just working, but I just wanted to say thank you for all the amazing work you're doing.
Really appreciate the kudos. Again, it's our mission. It's what we do. And, we all know that this virus has disproportionately affected at-risk populations. And, moving forward, I hope that this is a message to all of us to really address disparities in healthcare, which are real. And again, I thank you for the kind comments.
Well, it's the Nevada way. We come together in the middle of crisis. So thank you for being an example.
Thank you.
And next we will go to Assemblywoman Torres.
And I don't want to belabor the point, but really thank you so much to the UNLV School of Medicine for stepping up throughout the pandemic and continuing to step up every single day. I know Dr. Cully and I worked together closely throughout the last several months, and her students worked together with us closely. They delivered medicine to COVID-19 patients and gloves and masks and cleaning supplies. I think the School of Medicine really went above and beyond to ensure that we kept Nevada safe. So really thank you, and please express our gratitude as a caucus and as a legislative body to the students and staff at UNLV School of Medicine.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Becoming a new medical school dean in April, really at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the things that has not been challenging is to be able to message why we're here. And I really thank all of our partners for really working together during this crisis. There's really nothing like a crisis to break down silos, and that certainly is clear here in Nevada. So I appreciate the kind comments.
Okay, do we have any other questions? I know I have a question, but is looking around. Oh, and then Assemblywoman Tolles, did you have a question?
Yes, Madam Chair. And I have the little icon to raise my hand. Are you able to see that on your side?
No, I think it's better we just do this, but I will make sure I see this.
Okay.
People in school.
Okay. Thank you so much. So just to add on to that theme in terms of being One Nevada, I wanted to also say thank you. Some of your students who started a food delivery program actually made that inspirational way up to my class at UNR. We were, transitioned to online, and we're feeling a little depressed over it all. And we were inspired by that story, and it led to a end of the semester project to challenge them to find a way to give back in their community, modeled after the way that your students started a program to respond to COVID. So thank you for sharing that inspiration with our state and the ways that those ripple effects worked their way through our student body into the community. And so I wanted to just ask you quickly about, I saw on your leadership team on the last page that we have 2 associate deans for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in the same way that we had this conversation with the chancellor of NSHE, just how incredibly important it is to see continued advancement, not only in school, but also just in those higher paying jobs. And I wondered if you could supply to this committee where we are statistically in terms of the demographics of students enrolled at UNLV Medical School, and how that compares nationally, and what goals have you set out in order to increase that demographic participation.
Firstly, thank you for the kind comments. Food is a way to get to people. I learned that with my 25 years in New Orleans, and this is also a really good food town here in Las Vegas. So, when we talk about a diverse workforce in healthcare, it really is essential. The moral issues of disparities in healthcare are real, and the fact that one can predict disease outcome based on a zip code is troubling at best. In addition, we all know that diverse teams solve problems together. Are better able at solving problems. And for that reason, diversity is really one of our critical missions. And that's why on my early slide with our strategic plan, diversity and equity and inclusion really run through all the themes and run through everything that we do. When you ask about the School of Medicine, 62% of our student body are in a group that is otherwise underrepresented in medicine. Now, most of those students are made up of first-generation college students. We also have a large Latinx student population. We honestly, when you look at the population of Las Vegas, we do fall short on African Americans. And we have targeted outreach programs to get into our community, because again, I want a medical school class and I want a medical school faculty whose demographics parallel the population that we serve. Diversity is critical for getting rid of disparities in healthcare, and it's critical for becoming effective problem solvers. So I thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. And are there any other questions from the committee? I'm not seeing any hands going up. I have a couple questions. One, and if you said it and I missed it, I apologize. What is the completion date for the new building?
The new building is currently we're expected to have occupancy of the building somewhere late summer, early fall of 2022. So the building is going to be about 2 years ahead of schedule. Groundbreaking was about 4 months ahead of schedule. And because of availability of workers and availability of supplies, the building construction is also ahead of schedule. So late summer, early fall 2022.
Great. And I know you're the only one speaking right now, but we do like to identify ourselves for the record just because it helps.
I'm sorry, I forgot to do that. I'm new. For the record, Mark Kahn, Dean, UNLV School of Medicine. My apology.
Not at all. We have people who have been testifying for 20 years who still forget, so don't worry about that at all. My other question was, I'm very excited to see in 2021 we will have our first graduation and folks going into their residency. And I know that when UNLV Medical School, part of the opening class, they would interview them and make sure that they had an intent, a connection to Nevada and to Las Vegas in particular, to make sure we grow our own and keep our own, which is an issue that obviously we're dealing with many different industries. We were just talking about teaching. So where do we anticipate these residencies? Are they staying in state? And what do you think that matriculation will look like in your opinion?
Yeah, so thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly our mission is to increase the number of physicians in Nevada. And we're a very mission-based school. Because of that, nearly all of our students are from Nevada. The few that aren't have distinct and defined connections to Nevada. We would like our students to come back and practice here. We won't know where our students are doing their residencies until the third Friday in March, match day. And I hope that many of them stay here. Part of the reality, though, is that we, as a region and as a state, don't have as many spots for residency training as other states. And we have to work together to change that. Part of that also is some of the specialties that our students might want to go into, we don't even have a training program for those specialties in the state. So I know some students are going to leave for residency. My goal, and moving forward, the goal is to get those students to come back here to practice.
Thank you for that. And that was Dr. Kahn for the record.
Dr. Mark Kahn for the record. Thank you.
And thank you. And let's continue to have those conversations, because I think this is an issue, because we are worried that we'll send our students away and for whatever reason not get them back. So we'll continue to have this conversation if you're agreeable to that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. And are there any other questions? I know, and many of you probably saw in the chat, my vice chair had a question for Dr. Rose, and I didn't see it. I'm not sure if she's able to come back on, but we do have Andrew Klinger on, and I think that you will suffice for now, if that's okay with you, Vice Chair?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Chair. My question was, because I was actually very impressed, and I wanted to really salute the work that's being done by NSHE to reduce the amount of remedial courses. We know that this had a huge impact on graduation rates, specifically students of color. I know, I think it was just last year when a professor from California called me panicking because of laws that their legislature was trying to put in around remedial courses that was, as Chancellor Rose said, going in the wrong direction. So I'm glad to see that. But with that, we know that students will still need some supports, because again, the original intent of remedial is to bring our students up to the level of where they need to be. So just eliminating that classification doesn't mean we still don't have students that need some of those support. So if we don't have the remedial classes, what types of supports or interventions will be available to the students to make sure that they are able to, be successful in the college level courses?
Madam Chair, for the record, Andrew Klinger to Vice Chair Miller. This is definitely not my area of expertise, so if it is okay with you, I'd prefer to get back to you on that answer.
Sure, certainly. And if you could just submit it to the committee so that.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I know that was not ideal, and I do apologize.
Oh, wait, I see someone popping back in. Chair, may I?
Of course. Dr. Rose, did you hear the question by any chance? Okay.
I was down the hall, so my apologies.
Okay, so Chancellor, did you hear the question?
No. I did not.
Okay, so I acknowledged and commended you all for your work around reducing remedial courses. And because of the impact we know it has on graduation rates and on particularly students of color. I even mentioned, because I know you were in California, that a dean had called me last year concerned about some legislation going in the wrong direction around remedial courses that was possible in California. So my question is, so again, I applaud you. Thank you for
no worries.
Recognizing that. But of course, the original intent, the goal of remedial courses, we know, is to bring students up to the level so that they can be successful. Sometimes students are still behind, maybe lacking some skills. So without remedial courses, that doesn't change the fact that we still have students that need some supports and interventions. So my question is, what types of supports and interventions will be available to those students?
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Miller, for the question. And you're exactly right. So there is a national trend of moving away from the so-called remedial classes, what was in place when I went to college. And those, of course, always had a stigma around them. And for the reasons that I think you're suggesting, oftentimes biases filtered in the assignment of particular students to remedial courses. So it's an equity agenda as much as anything else. So the trend has been to move away from remedial. We know it doesn't work. We know it serves to reinforce stereotypes that were pre-existing. And the replacement is what we call co-requisite. So I'll just pull an example out of the air. It's not a precise example, but it gives you a sense of how the model works. I have 2 daughters in college right now. If my daughter Chloe, went into the university behind in her writing, she would move into the writing course that all other freshmen would move into. So she's not pulled out and segregated into a remedial course. She's in the same course with wraparound services added on top to support her catching up. And so, in other words, those services that are called co-rec, it's the assignment of like an adjacent coach or an adjacent class, is invisible to the rest of the people in that class. So that my daughter, Chloe, gets what she needs without announcing it to everyone in Writing 101. So it's a very different way to meet our students where they are, without bias, without stigma.
And follow-up, Chair? Chancellor, with that, and I appreciate it because it sounds closer to much of the K-12 model, that sometimes students receive services without everyone knowing, and certainly in college without you taking a semester and spending money on classes that ultimately won't for graduation. Are there some data right now about where this has been successful, or have we done it long enough here in Nevada where we have some indication of the success rate compared to the traditional remedial classes?
So great question. And I think I forgot to reintroduce myself, Melody Rose, Chancellor Avenchi, for the record. We don't have data from Nevada because we're not launching until fall. So this has been an all system effort that has gone on for, I believe, about almost 2 years to align this practice across every institution so that it's seamless for all of our students. But it is based on national models. So we could certainly provide you some of the national data and national models that we are implementing in the fall, if that would be helpful.
It would be, Chancellor. And one final question, is the onus for these services on the student or is it on the school? So obviously in K through 12, it's on the school and the educators. So is that the same model it would be with the colleges, where we as counselors will identify and reach out to students, and if it's tutoring or extra, however that actually looks?
Yes, it's also shifting internal resources at the institutions, as you might imagine, during budgetary times like these. For example, I just got a request from one of the institutions recently that's gearing up for this new practice in the fall that needs to shift some of its internal resources to support this agenda. So yes, it is up to the institutions to staff it and make it work. I think that it's a change in mindset, and one that I have always been an advocate of. You know, for too long in higher education, when students have struggled, we've said, why are these students failing? And what I've been trying to do in my career is to flip that narrative and to ask ourselves, how are we failing these students? And so with this shift from remedial to co-rec, I think that's exactly what we're doing. We're saying we need to meet you where you are and provide you with what you need to be successful at our institution. So I'm really happy they did all this great work before I got here. And I just get to see it roll out.
Well, excellent. We're happy that you're here to manage that. And Chair, thank you so much for the unorthodox approach to making sure we could get this on the record. Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for coming back on, Dr. Rose. And I believe, Dr. Khan, are you still on?
I am.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that I would like to continue to have this conversation about residencies. And so if you could send over data on that, I would sure appreciate it. And if there's something that we can do during this session to facilitate increased residencies here in Nevada, or at least get the conversation started, I think that's an important conversation to have. So please send that over. And I thank you both. This was fascinating and quite frankly, really uplifting. And I think we all need that in this time to hear what great things are going on in the. And Dr. Rose has a call.
That's my 3 o'clock.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And you are free to go. We won't be calling you back. We're going to go ahead and move on to public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Please remember to clearly state and spell your name and limit your comments to 2 minutes. Staff in our broadcasting and production service, please add the first caller with public comment to the meeting.
Good afternoon, Chair. The line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
All righty. Are there any comments from the members before we adjourn? I'm looking. Okay. then our next meeting will be Thursday, February 11th at 1:30. This concludes our meeting for today. Meeting is adjourned.